I did go to Diana's coffin the day after I'd written it, and I read it to her in there, and I did sort of feel
There is a house in the English countryside that the rest of the world has almost forgotten about. Tucked into the rolling fields of Northamptonshire, behind iron gates and centuries of quiet, Althorp House has stood for over 500 years as the ancestral home of the Spencer family. For most of the world, it is simply the place where Princess Diana was laid to rest, the private island in the ornamental lake where she sleeps, undisturbed, beyond the reach of cameras. But for one man, it is something far more personal than a tourist destination or a historical landmark. For Charles Spencer, the 9th Earl Spencer, and the youngest brother of the late Diana, Princess of Wales, Althorp is both a home and a post, a watchtower from which he has silently guarded his sister's memory for nearly 3 decades. He has been so quiet for so long that the world occasionally forgets he exists at all. But that is exactly how Charles Spencer has wanted it. Because when a man like him finally speaks, when the keeper of Althorp finally breaks his silence, the room does not just go quiet, it shakes. And in recent months, the room shook in a way that has left Prince Harry reeling and Meghan Markle without one of the most important cards she ever thought she held. To understand what has happened, you first need to understand who Charles Spencer actually is, because modern royal coverage has largely pushed him to the margins. He is 62 years old. He is a historian, an author, and a custodian of British heritage. But above all of those titles, he is the man who stood at the pulpit of Westminster Abbey on September 6, 1997, in front of an estimated 2 billion people watching around the globe, and delivered one of the most extraordinary eulogies in the history of the modern world. That moment deserves more than a passing mention, because it was not merely a farewell speech, it was a declaration. Charles Spencer described his sister as someone who proved that it was possible to perform the most thankless of tasks without any of the recognition that the palace offered. He called her, in the speech's most unforgettable line, the most hunted person of the modern age. He named the tabloid press. He challenged the royal establishment directly. He did not flinch. And then, looking directly across his sister's coffin at William and Harry, he made a promise that the Spencer blood family would do all they could to continue the imaginative way in which Diana had been raising her sons, so that their souls would not simply be immersed in duty and tradition, but could sing openly, as she had planned. As Charles Spencer himself later revealed on the Rosebud podcast in late 2025, he had actually written a completely different speech before settling on those words. He had originally planned something far more conventional. She was very good at this, as a child, as he described it, but he discarded it overnight, feeling it was ridiculous and untrue to who Diana really was. So he rewrote it in an hour and a half and delivered it knowing that every syllable mattered. He told the podcast that by the final paragraph, he had run out of energy and nearly out of oxygen, having to punch each syllable out from the base of his stomach. He was looking directly at William and Harry the entire time. That context is not incidental. It is the entire foundation of what Charles Spencer has done ever since that day. He understood that Diana had, in a non-legally binding but deeply personal gesture, left him as guardian of her sons. The law could not enforce it, because their father was still alive. But to Charles Spencer, it meant something. He said so himself. That sort of duty meant something to him. And from that day forward, he has carried it. What followed over the next 2.5 decades was a masterclass in dignified restraint. Charles Spencer stepped back from the spotlight. He managed Althorp. He opened the estate to visitors each summer, with the proceeds going to charity. He was protective of the private archives within those walls, the personal letters, the home movies, the diaries, the material that belongs not to public history, but to family memory. He spoke about Diana occasionally, always with care, always without sensationalism, always on his own terms. He was not indifferent. He was strategic. He understood that Diana's legacy was simultaneously the world's most beloved story and its most vulnerable target. There were people on every continent willing to monetize her grief, her loneliness, her pain. He had watched it happen in real time during her lifetime. He had learned from it, And when Diana was gone, he made a quiet, private, unbreakable decision. Nothing from within those walls, nothing from within that archive, would be handed to anyone who had commercial interest at the heart of their project. He had already set that precedent, notably, back in 2017, 2 decades after Diana's death, when a documentary featuring recordings Diana had made privately for her voice coach was set to air on Channel 4. Reports at the time indicated that Charles Spencer urged Channel 4 not to broadcast those tapes, citing concern about the distress it could cause to William and Harry. His objection was not about censorship. It was about the dignity of the person he loved most and the protection of the 2 young men he had promised to look after across her coffin. That is the man at the center of this story. Now enter Meghan Markle. When Harry married Meghan in May 2018, many members of Diana's extended circle watched with cautious hope. A new chapter, a new princess. And Meghan did something from the very beginning that seemed at first like a touching tribute. She wore Diana's jewelry. The aquamarine ring, a piece Diana had favored in the later years of her life, appeared on Meghan's hand at the evening reception following their wedding. Then came the butterfly earrings, the Cartier tank watch, gold bracelets. One by one, at events where the cameras would be most prominent, Diana's personal pieces appeared on Meghan's wrist, on her finger, around her neck. Nobody could accuse Meghan of being unaware of the symbolism. These were not accidental choices. They were intentional, carefully coordinated appearances designed to draw a visual line between the most beloved princess of the 20th century and the newest member of the royal family. Many people responded with warmth. It felt like remembrance. It felt like continuity. It felt, on the surface, like love. But as the months and years passed, a different pattern became visible not to tabloid critics, but to people who had actually known Diana personally. What began as tribute began to feel more like architecture. The 2021 Oprah Winfrey interview, for example, was analyzed exhaustively by royal observers who noted the striking structural similarities between that interview and Diana's own 1995 Panorama interview, the one in which Diana went directly to the public because the palace had closed every internal door on her. The soft lighting, the intimate framing, the themes of mental health ignored by the institution, of loneliness within a system that did not care, of a woman forced to speak out because no one inside would listen. Meghan did not reference Diana by name throughout that Oprah interview. She did not have to. The parallels were constructed carefully enough that the audience drew the connection themselves. And once drawn, that connection carried enormous emotional and commercial weight. It gave the Sussex narrative the backing of the most powerful sympathy the royal world had ever generated. Then came the Netflix documentaries, the confessional camera angles, the couple fleeing the establishment framing, the recurring implication, delivered through aesthetics and tone more than direct statement, that what happened to Diana was happening again this time, to Meghan, that the establishment that hunted Diana had turned its gaze on a new generation and that Harry and Meghan were its modern targets. It is worth saying clearly, this kind of narrative is emotionally compelling. For millions of people who loved Diana, who watched her suffer and grieve and fight, the suggestion that her son was now being put through the same thing was genuinely upsetting. It worked, in media terms, because the raw material it was built on Diana's real pain was genuine. The tragedy was real. The injustice was real. But for Charles Spencer, watching from Althorp, none of this felt like tribute. He had watched his sister's actual vulnerability get turned into television content in her own lifetime. He knew what exploitation looked like. He knew how a grieving, isolated woman's pain could be packaged and broadcast to a global audience for commercial reasons. He had lived through it, and increasingly, from his position in Northamptonshire, he could see that same architecture being rebuilt. Then came the documentary proposal, and everything changed. By early 2026, the Sussex media operation was under significant pressure. The numbers were undeniable. The second season of With Love, Meghan's lifestyle show for Netflix, had been ranked 1,217th in Netflix's own viewership report for the second half of 2025, attracting only around 2 million views across its entire run. For context, the show did not crack Netflix's weekly top 10 charts, and according to Deadline Hollywood, it failed to make Luminate's top 50 streaming charts in the United States, even in its first week. Netflix had already downgraded the Sussex's original deal, which had been reported to be worth around $100 million, to a first-look arrangement. The as-ever lifestyle brand, which had been built with considerable fanfare, had also seen Netflix pull its investment earlier in the year. The golden era of Sussex content was visibly dimming. And so, according to multiple reports, a major project was put on the table, one designed to remind the streaming world and the global public exactly why Harry and Meghan still mattered. The concept was a documentary timed to mark the 30th anniversary of Princess Diana's death in August 1997. A cinematic, emotionally powerful tribute to be released in 2027. According to reporting from IMDb News and other outlets, the project was envisioned as a solo endeavor for Harry, with him taking on a significant role as co-executive producer, host, and narrator. But here's where the proposal took on its most controversial dimension. According to reports, the documentary was also conceived as something that drew a direct connection between Diana's story and Meghan's story, positioning Meghan as a modern echo of Diana. Another woman forced out by the establishment, another voice the institution tried to silence. And to make the project credible, authentic, and cinematically powerful, the Sussex team reportedly wanted access to materials that only one man on Earth controls: the private Spencer family archives housed at Althorp House, personal letters, home movies that have never been publicly released, material that gives the private Diana, not the public one, to the screen for the first time. They needed Charles Spencer. And they went to him. Reports suggest that the meeting took place while Charles Spencer was on his honeymoon in Sedona, Arizona, with his new wife, Professor Kat Jarman. He reportedly took time away from his honeymoon to meet with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex and their children. What happened in that conversation? Sources close to the situation told New Idea magazine was a complete and categorical rejection. The insider quoted in that report described the proposal as being arguably more about Meghan than Diana, and said that Charles was insulted by what he saw in front of him. The gates of Althorp for this project were closed, and they were closed without hesitation. The source told New Idea that Meghan was reportedly devastated and very hurt by the rejection, but the consequences did not end there. According to that same reporting, Charles may have effectively cut the Sussexes out from the Althorp archives and estate entirely, meaning that not just this project, but any future attempt to access those materials has been blocked. For a documentary project that had been built around the emotional weight of Althorp, around the idea of returning to the place where Diana grew up and where she now rests, this was not merely a setback, it was a structural collapse. Without the Spencer family's blessing and without access to private materials that have never been seen publicly, the documentary loses the very thing that was meant to make it unmissable. Now, why did Charles Spencer make this call? The surface-level answer is obvious. He saw a project that placed Meghan at the center of a story that belongs, first and foremost, to Diana, and he rejected it. But there is a deeper layer here, one that Charles himself has gestured toward in interviews over the years. He carries guilt about his sister's Panorama interview. He was the one who introduced Diana to the journalist involved in that project, the same interview that was later found to have been obtained through forged documents and psychological manipulation, as the independent review led by Lord Dyson confirmed in 2021. Charles Spencer was not aware of the deception at the time. He did not know that Diana was being manipulated. He introduced her in good faith to someone he believed could help her speak. But when the full truth emerged, it landed hard. He had unwittingly played a role in one of the most significant exploitations of his sister's pain during her lifetime. He has spent every year since then ensuring that nothing like that happens again. He is not going to hand over private diaries, unseen home movies, and family archives to a production shaped by people with a vested commercial interest in the outcome, regardless of what the final product is called or how it is framed. His standard is simple and immovable. If the primary driver is not Diana herself, if it is anything else, any other agenda, any other name, the answer is no. The response from elsewhere in the royal world has been telling. Prince William, according to a report in the International Business Times from June 2026, has reportedly been deeply uncomfortable with reports of any project that could commercialize Diana's legacy. The report described him as sickened by the idea that his late mother's image and memory could be turned into a commercial opportunity in the approach to the 30th anniversary. William is, of course, deeply limited in how directly he can intervene. As the future King of England, any public move to block his brother's media projects becomes an international story about censorship and royal family warfare. The institution cannot be seen to act. It simply cannot afford that headline. But Charles Spencer can. When a private citizen, even one who is a titled nobleman, refuses a business proposal, it is not censorship. It is a personal decision. And when that private citizen is the man who stood at Diana's coffin and made a specific promise about protecting her sons and her memory, it carries a moral authority that the palace simply cannot replicate. Charles Spencer did what William could not do publicly. He said no, and he said it as Diana's brother, not as an institution, as a man who loved her. There are reports, according to sources cited in coverage of this story, that Charles Spencer also reached out to Prince William in a different capacity, urging him to consider addressing the widening family rift before it causes damage that cannot be repaired. Not for Harry's sake, and not for Meghan's, but for the institution's sake. The argument, as it has been described, is strategic. By maintaining total silence, the palace is leaving the public narrative entirely in the hands of the Sussexes. Every speech Harry gives, every interview Meghan conducts, every trailer Netflix releases, it plays unchallenged. And into that vacuum, the Sussex framing becomes the dominant global story. Charles Spencer's concern, from all available indications, is about the long-term health of the monarchy and about what happens to Diana's real legacy when one version of it is allowed to grow unchecked. Whether William acts on that is another question entirely. Their relationship has been strained to the point where many royal observers describe it as essentially non-existent. The brothers, who once walked side by side behind their mother's coffin, have not spoken, according to most credible reporting, in years. And then there is the question of Harry. Because through all of this, the rejected documentary, the closed Althorp gates, the Netflix numbers, the public debate, Harry remains the most heartbreaking figure in the story. He is, by almost every account, genuinely and profoundly shaped by the loss of his mother. He has spoken about it with obvious and unguarded pain in virtually every platform he has used. The documentary proposal, whatever its commercial dimensions, likely also grew from something real and raw: a son who wants the world to know his mother before the 30-year mark passes without his voice being heard. But the tragedy, if there is one, is that the vehicle he chose, a Netflix production shaped in significant part by commercial necessity and by a narrative architecture that places Meghan alongside Diana, was never going to be something Charles Spencer could agree to. Not because Charles does not care about Harry. Reports suggest he is, in fact, the one member of the extended family who has maintained something resembling actual contact with his nephew. The New Idea report described Charles as the only one who still has time for Harry. But that relationship, however intact, has a limit, and the limit is Diana herself. Harry has, by most accounts available, found himself in a position where the two most important relationships in his adult life are in fundamental tension: his marriage to Meghan and his connection to his mother's memory. Every time the Sussex media operation uses Diana as a frame for Meghan's story, it pulls those two things further apart. It forces the people who loved Diana, her brother, her older son, to draw lines that no one wanted to draw. What does all of this mean going forward? That is the question that everyone is circling. The documentary, as originally conceived, appears to be in serious trouble. Without Althorp, without the Spencer archives, without the private materials that were meant to be its emotional core, the project loses its most distinctive selling point. Any documentary about Diana that lacks the Spencer family's cooperation is, as Charles himself would likely agree, simply another documentary about a woman who has already been the subject of many documentaries. The field is not empty. Netflix itself already hosts films featuring Charles Spencer, offering his perspective on his sister's life and legacy. The Sussex media operation, meanwhile, is at an inflection point that even the most sympathetic observer cannot ignore. The numbers for With Love, Meghan are a matter of public record. 1,217th on Netflix's own viewership charts is not a number anyone can spin into success. The As Ever brand has lost Netflix's investment. The deal that once defined their California reinvention has been reduced to a first-look arrangement with no guaranteed future. And the one project that might have justified it all, a 30th anniversary Diana documentary with genuine emotional and archival weight, has been rejected by the one man whose blessing it needed most.